We've had a lot of conflict and confusion around this. I've had farmers tell me that MSPCA's pushed them into doing three-sided shelter for animals that never go in the shelter because they're high-owned cattle and they like being outside. Flip side of that, I've had reports of farmers putting animals out and using trees as windbreaks when that wasn't sufficient shelter for them. The shelter needs of an animal really depend on the age, the condition, and the species of the animal. This very simply puts together veterinarians, farmers, and humane organizations putting together some standards which they could share and use, which I think would be in everybody's interest, not the least of which is the livestock. The last one is SB 528, an act encouraging the use of renewable energy on agricultural land. Legislature made some changes a few years ago that allowed land and renewable energy to remain under 61A so long as no more than 125% of the farm's needs were produced. We appreciate that. Unfortunately, it seems there's some discussion as to whether that allows local zoning to control that. One of the things this bill would do would change that so on-farm energy production would be in line with every other farming activity which enjoys the protections of 48.3. The other thing it does, which has come up since you made that change, is it defines and ensures that dual-use energy, where the same piece of land is used simultaneously for agriculture and energy production, is covered under 61A. Do you have any questions on that?
Good. Any questions, comments? That's how to do it, folks.
Great. Thank you for your time.
All righty. Chris Egan, Dan Mosley.
Thank you. We're here to testify in opposition to House 897. This is a bill that on the surface might seem unobjectionable, but the more you look into it, the more concerning it becomes. There'll be speakers today who will talk about the job loss that this bill would cause in rural communities, the loss of revenue to towns because they share in forest management proceeds conducted on DCR lands. That money typically goes to emergency service workers in town because it's not a predictable source of revenue. It goes to buy gear and vehicles, firefighters and others. It also takes the visioning process, which the Commonwealth went through, and it takes the science-based division or allocation of land and takes all that hard work and throws it in the trash and puts everything into reserves or parklands where no forest management can take place. It also isn't good for wildlife. In Massachusetts, we have a lot of 80 to 120-year-old trees, forest ages. What we don't have enough of is young forest. And there are species that rely on that young forest habitat to survive. So mass wildlife on their lands has been creating that early successional forest habitat. This bill applies to those mass wildlife lands and puts the land in reserves with no forest management possible, but it actually even explicitly prohibits the creation of early successional forest habitat. So those species which have already been declining, migratory songbirds, birds like the woodcock and the whippoorwill, the New England cottontail, which is being displaced by the eastern cottontail, and so forth, those species that are already in decline, this bill would speed that decline. You know, the argument for this bill, I think that's going to be made is that carbon sequestration outweighs all those concerns. And so you might get the impression that state lands are going in the wrong direction, that we're actually losing carbon sequestration on our state lands instead of sequestering more carbon. But the facts just don't bear that out. If you look at DCR lands, in particular, over the last 60 years, they've nearly doubled the amount of carbon sequestered on each acre of their land. That's the equivalent of taking 5.5 million cars off the road. And they've never come close to harvesting even 0.5% of the stored carbon on their properties, and it's vastly outweighed by the carbon sequestered. And you might say, what about mass wildlife lands? They're creating this early successional forest habitat that involves some heavy cutting. But in fact, they did a carbon study in 2006. They created nearly 30,000 acres of early successional forests, and they found that the carbon sequestered during that time period outweighed the reverse by more than 60 to 1. So we're making good progress and getting the things we need from our forests.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to testify, and then I would also like to be recorded in favor of the bills that the Farm Bureau testified. I won't go through the whole list of bills, but I would be reporting in favor of that. For the record, and through you, Mr. Chairman, I was a state rep for 24 years. The Florida State Forest is in my district. I wrote the electric restructuring bill in 1997, so I've been working on climate change for the last 25 years. I appreciate, and there's a lot of well-meaning people that are here today to testify because they're also concerned about climate change. This is not the way to do it, though. The absolute prohibition over sale, over harvesting, over taking timber out of forests just is not the way to do this. And I say that based on my experience, being from out in Western Mass. It is, we have, most of what I learned was from Jay Healy, who was our colleague for many, many years. He served several decades, and his father served before him as a state rep. But for the last 100 years, he has managed to harvest his forest. For the last 100 years, and he has a sawmill, and he sells pine board, and he sells other wood, and he's been able to manage that. And his forest is only 100 acres. For the last 100 years, he has forested that land. And the reason he's able to do that is because he manages that forest. It doesn't take a genius to figure out big trees are better than small trees when you're trying to suck in CO2 and you're trying to emit oxygen. But the big trees also form canopies. They also crowd out other trees. And some of them get sick. And so you have to manage that. The ability to manage that is taken away in this bill. So with all the well-meaning piece of this bill, I would suggest that this bill is not the way to go and that we should continue to do the science-based approach that we did just several years ago that was enacted. So I'm hoping that you'll take that into consideration. I'm willing to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions, comments? Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Brian Witt.
Brian Wick, Executive Director of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association. In testifying on two bills primarily, House Bill 882, the Farm Technology Commission. This is a commission that was established in 2008 under the Dairy Revitalization Task Force, and it worked very well for them, looking at technologies, waste management, and other improvements that could be helpful to the dairy industry. Over time, this committee has stopped meeting and hasn't met in over 7 years. And we would like to get that commission reestablished, but broaden it to all of agriculture, not just the dairy industry. So all sectors of ag can take part in that and looking at basically like a think tank to help come up with new policies, programs, plans for energy and technology improvements on the farm. The second bill is Senate Bill 528, the use of renewable energy on ag land. Under the SMART program, the state's new SMART program, dual use agriculture has a unique opportunity to both have solar panels and farmland on the same property, the same piece of land underneath the panel would be agriculture. There'd be no tree removals in that instance, and there'd be certain restrictions on the heights and the spacing of those panels, which is all outlined in the SMART program. But the biggest challenge that we're seeing in some of these growers who are exploring the opportunities is with some of the local zoning challenges that make it very problematic to do that. And in this particular case, it's still going to be dual-use ag. It's not just commercial solar. It's agriculture and the solar working hand in hand. So we think that this bill will help address some of those challenges that we're seeing. And in the last minute, I'll add House Bill 867, viability of farms in the Commonwealth. This is a very sensible bill that we see. It offers an opportunity for rules and regulations that are going to go into effect both at the state or municipal level to make sure that agriculture is considered before they go into effect. So it's just another check to make sure that these policies or rules that are going into place will not have a significant economic impact to the farm of the Commonwealth. I think it makes sense, and it's something that I can really encourage.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much. Oh, Representative Gregoire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your time, and I will be tell you that I'm here to testify in support of two bills that I filed with my colleagues, H 480 and Senate 435. You'll notice they're on the list of opposed bills from the Farm Bureau. We filed them on behalf of the residents of the town of Northborough, which I'm proud to represent. And I believe you'll be hearing from the town administrator from the town of Northborough today, if not several of the residents of that town, who will be here to tell you about the horror stories that they have suffered from composting operations in their town. One of the farmers that has been acting was previously convicted of illegal composting, and as a matter of fact, spent some time in prison as a result of that conviction. And the town of Northborough has now had to expend a significant amount of money to sue him on behalf of those residents, and that process is still ongoing. And now here we are 3 years later with the town residents having to deal with the stench coming from this illegal composting operation. So while we understand that NDAR is reviewing their composting regulations now and potentially changing them, they have not, to the best of our knowledge, been willing to work with the residents of the town on their suggestions. We just really are looking for a little bit of local control to better the quality of life of a teeny tiny town the size of 4 precincts, which I know, Mr. Chairman, you have towns that are even smaller than that. But for my money, that's a pretty small town, and really the entirety of the town is impacted, as well as a couple of the adjacent towns. So we're asking that even if you can't support this language or some version thereof it, that you work with us and we continue to work together with the administration and through the legislative process to try to give these townspeople some relief.
840, what was the other bill?
Sorry. Senate 435. Thank you so much.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a big list, and I don't know if you're all coming up together or just a couple of people testifying, but and somebody signed all the names. I can't read them all. Susan, looks like Stephen Frank, Bill Copeland, Bill. These names ring a bell? Darcy Sweeney, Carol Horowitz, Janet Sinclair. Is one person going to testify, or?
One at a time.
I think I was quick.
Okay. So Susan is first.
Good afternoon. I just handed in several documents, some recent research, an article by Bill McKibben, a resolution passed unanimously by the Connecticut State Range on Public Forests, and all of these align with the spirit of and the intent of House Bill 897, which I would like to strongly support. I'm also a Grange member and definitely support rural economies and agriculture and forestry. I'm a professor of applied science and a research fellow at Harvard Forest, and I've been collaborating with Harvard Medical School on a project on forests and brain health. So my stance on these issues is a matter of public record, and I am strongly in favor of public policies that promote public good and public health. And this bill does exactly that. There's a lot of evidence coming out about the importance of forests for mental health, for new medicines, for promoting health in healthy people, so prevention is our least expensive way to address many of our common and increasing problems that we have going on right now. And since I have 6 pages of single-space testimony from myself and also from Dr. William Muma, I'm just going to have to hit the very, very short high points. Yes, that's correct. So I know that we're still discovering new things in our forests. We discovered 16 new species last year in a teaspoonful of dirt. We have ongoing studies at Harvard Medical School looking at old soils from our older forests, looking for new medicines. And my collaborator from Harvard Medical School has been getting club moss substances from China and has found drugs that are more effective than anything currently on the market for epilepsy and pain. And those same plants and analogs and many other plants are here in New England. So we really need to treasure what we have and use them for public health and public good. Just to highlight some points of Dr. Lumaw's testimony, he is right now at Climate Week in New York because he's the board chair of the Climate Group North America. We collaborated on a paper called Pro-Forestation, showing that letting our existing forests grow is less expensive, more effective, and more powerful than any other strategy to promote carbon sequestration and biodiversity, and from my perspective, also public health, as I explained. Some recent research out of Woods Hole is showing that our carbon is not increasing in our forests as we thought it would. We don't know why, but we're losing it. And our forests can sequester 2 to 4.3 times as much carbon as they already do now. We also know that trees sequester more and more carbon as they get older because they're larger. There's more carbon in the soils and more carbon in the roots, and just an incredible complex ecosystem. And that ecosystem is more resilient to the stresses of climate change, and it's something that we absolutely need. Only about 1.2% of Massachusetts is protected as an intact ecosystem, and we are really relying on you to try and pass this bill so we can responsibly care for our natural systems. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much. Before we do, gentlemen, Senator Kennedy is here. Got a nice ring too, doesn't it? Yes. We can just take him out of order, as I know he has nothing to do with it, so.
Jim Pignatelli, thank you. I'm testifying today to encourage the committee to affirm the Commonwealth's commitment to a clean environment by supporting the favorable passage of Senate 493, an act reestablishing the Clean Environment Fund. The Clean Environment Fund was initially established along with the Bottle Bill in 1989, which attached a 5-cent deposit to soda, beer, malt beverages, and sparkling water containers. The intent was that abandoned deposits from containers not returned to redemption centers would be used to support recycling, composting, solid waste reduction, and other environmental programs. However, from fiscal year 1990 to fiscal year 2002, only 27%, or 60 million of those funds, went to the Clean Environment Fund, with the other 73%, $166 million, funding the Department of Environmental Protection overhead costs. The Clean Environment Fund was dismantled during the recession, with all unclaimed deposits going directly into the state's general fund. Today, as we face an acute climate crisis and municipalities are faced with the continuing need to come up with innovative solid waste solutions, as well as means by which to improve and maintain public recreation lands, there is no better time to reestablish the fund. Under this proposal, 40% of all money collected by the Commissioner of Revenue from unreturned beverage containers, as well as any appropriation from other monies authorized by the General Court specifically designated to be credited to the fund, and any income derived from the investment of amounts credited to the fund will be deposited in the Clean Environment Fund, which will be administered by the Secretary of Energy and the Environment. Not less than 60% of the money credited annually to the fund shall be used to provide funding for state and municipal solid waste reduction, recycling, littering, and composting programs and initiatives, outreach programs, sustainable material recovery programs and initiatives, and recycling equipment and infrastructure improvements. Any remaining amounts credited annually to the fund shall be used for improvements to state parks, state forest recreation areas, and state reservations that are under the control of the state's Department of Conservation and Recreation, provided that the improvements, if applicable, meet or exceed the current leadership in energy environmental design building standards established by the United States Green Building Council. Restoring this fund will assist municipalities in developing smart, sustainable waste management strategies and in serving as responsible environmental stewards. As we endeavor to maintain the place of our Commonwealth as a national leader on environmental policy, we must do so in a way that benefits all. For that reason, I hope that the committee supports the passage of this bill. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Any questions, comments? I'd like to welcome Senator Rush to the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next was Stephen Frank, is that right?
Dr. Stephen Franz, yes.
Franz?
Franz, yes.
Okay.
I'm with Global Environmental Options, formerly with Johns Hopkins University, Department of Pathobiology, State University of New York, Department of Environmental Health and Toxicology. I'm here to support H97. And as empirical as we scientists are, something that we do is we rehash and rehash science to find the best. And science changes over time based on new technologies. And what we do know now is that the carbon sequestration that occurs, well, the carbon storage above ground and below ground has changed. We used to think it was mostly above ground, now we know it's mostly below ground, but the two systems are interdependent. And it's very important to preserve both. And disturbing forests above ground or below ground affects the carbon sequestration. So older trees sequester more carbon than younger trees, as has been said by a previous speaker, and the rate of drawdown increases year by year. That's very important because these old forests do their jobs increasingly well. So undisturbed forest over time is one of the easiest, least expensive approaches to maximize carbon storage. And similarly, actions that disturb below ground and you disturb the soil microbiome also decreases carbon sequestration. So basically, you don't want to mess with either one. I mean, to put it in the simplest terms possible. So I think clearly having carbon in standing trees, especially older trees, as we know, and in the ground, in soil not contaminated by pesticides, and pesticides are often used in forest management, and so that deters carbon sequestration. So that is scientifically vetted the best approach to address the climate crisis. On disturbed forest over time, this is important to note, it's not just short term, also maximizes species biodiversity and reduces extensive fire damage. You saw when there is a fire, and it also increases jobs in terms of monitoring those forests. So to echo the sentiment of our dear 16-year-old Greta, who spoke yesterday at the UN, how dare we adopt any policy that does not maximize remediation of the climate crisis. Proforestation, which means unmanaged forests, maximizes remediation of the climate crisis with regard to forests, sequestration of carbon, both in quantity and increasing rate of drawdown. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator O'Connor, you want to testify?
Yes, out of this bill.
Yeah, we've already said we're going to take legislative out of order. It's a very busy day. If you want to testify now, you can do that.
I can wait till these guys.
Well, there's a whole list more. Whatever, it's up to you.
All right, I'll do it now.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to be out of order. I'll be very brief. Thank you, Chairman Pignatelli, and through you to the members of the committee. I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 508, which is an act relative to the community preservation funds for seawall repairs. This bill would allocate that not less than 10% of annual revenues from the community preservation fund for each municipality go towards the preservation of coastal infrastructure where that is applicable in that community. The money generated from CPA will help preserve our first line of defense from coastal threats. Investing in coastal infrastructure will help us avoid irreparable harm to our prized historical buildings, our green space, and our public housing, while reducing public expenditures on storm damage response. Our community infrastructure, property, and land, including the traditional benefactors of CPA monies, are increasingly under threat from severe coastal storms, flooding, and erosion. Northeast-facing coastlines are even more susceptible to coastal storms and erosion. As climate changes, nor'easters increase in severity, size, and length. Bigger storms mean more damage, as we saw in March of 2016, where vast stretches of seawalls in the district I represent were damaged or destroyed. Seawalls, jetties, and other engineered structures were designed and built to protect buildings and infrastructure. Many of these structures were built prior to modern coastline policies and regulations, and until recently, no centralized accounting of coastal structures existed. Some seawalls were over 80 years old, part of the public works projects, and according to DCR and CZN, 27% of the exposed coastal shoreline is armored by some of some form of public or private coastal protection and is in need of repair. $600 million has been spent in federal disaster relief in the wake of coastal events since 1978. We can reduce the private, social, and quite frankly, human cost of storms and floods by investing in seawall repair and coastal infrastructure. It's for these reasons I respectfully urge the committee a favorable report to Senate Bill 508. As we expand the CPA portfolio, I think it just it goes hand in hand with what our communities are facing right now. The coastal communities in Massachusetts is that we'd love to be able to spend some of the funds that we receive through CPA on protecting our coastal infrastructure.
Any questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Vice Chair. President Hayes, Chairman, very much. Okay, Bill Copeland. We'll pass it on. Yes.
Thank you for this hearing and listening to involved. I'm here in favor of 897. I'm a pediatrician and landowner and teacher in Northfield, Massachusetts. With its Protect First approach and flexibility, H897 will not only help increase carbon storage, it will also help increase the diversity and abundance of the many species that require high-quality forest cover. With few exceptions, forests have higher abundance and diversity of plants, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and probably insects than other land cover types. Established forests have the highest primary productivity with more diverse, high-volume food webs. No land cover type has more structural complexity or more even temperature and moisture regimes. These qualities make forests resilient and they improve the older they get. With the provisions of 897, we may witness firsthand the return of stature and abundance to formerly deforested and misused lands. As opponents to the bill point out, some species in serious decline require more open habitat to survive, to thrive. They claim that cutting forests not only benefits these species, but may even be required for their persistence. Logging is justified on the basis that early successional species actually need it. The truth is more complicated. I ask that you look at the handout I have provided. The top figure maps the decline of early successional verbs. Dark is greatest decline, light is least decline. Just below is a map of early successional forest percentage. Dark is lowest, light is highest. The maps should match, but they don't. What is going on? Clearly, extraction forest cutting does not benefit these birds. New and better kinds of forest management are possible, and H897 provides the flexibility to discover what works while protecting our forests from treatments that do not. Protecting forests from extraction cutting provides better wildlife corridors, improved conditions for interior forest species, more balanced food webs, more standing dead snags, reduced opportunity for invasive exotics, higher seed bank density, and enhanced access to nutrients in the deep root zone. Under H97, PCR will have a critical ongoing role in seeing that priority is given to the study and enhancement of our forest ecosystems. We must ask the right questions about management and stop assuming that cutting helps because we wish it did. The legacy of poor forest management practices on Massachusetts public and private lands is evident. Thousands of acres of deformed and scarred trees, damaged wetlands, skewed canopy makeup, thin humus layer, compacted and acidified soils, and low biodiversity. For the lands that belong to us, the public lands, we can and should insist that they be treated better. From my own early life and later career as a researcher, pediatrician, and science teacher, I know that access to high-quality natural environments can make a real difference in the lives of people. For children, parks and playgrounds are not enough. Such environments with their signature of human control cannot show a curious child that the world has its own laws and that it can't be replaced if it's destroyed. Being safe but alone to test ideas, feelings, and personal powers in even a small part of the natural world out of reach of human control and inform us of something very important at any age. The world is fragile and powerful and too complicated to ever know fully. Without these realizations, we risk becoming haughty and careless. Without the cultural treasures of curiosity and inquiry, we will lose our way in a single generation. We must reconsider our habitual disregard for ecosystem integrity and protect the lands of Massachusetts for future generations. With H. 897 as law, we will be in a better position to educate and inspire the public about the extraordinary value of our forest ecosystems and the services they provide.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Bill Summerfield, is that correct?
That's right.
All right.
I'm Bill Stubblefield from Wendell, a small town in the western part of the state. I hold a doctorate in biology from Harvard University, and I am a proud member of the Wendell State Forest Alliance. Today we stand on the brink of the 6th great extinction as the rate of species loss approaches that of the 5 great extinctions of the geological past, each of which dramatically altered the history of life. A recent UN panel reported that about 1 million species are in imminent danger of extinction. Long-term sampling is showing that dramatic declines in insect abundance, so much so that we hear of an insect apocalypse already underway. And still the evidence mounts. Just last week, scientists reported that there are now almost 3 billion fewer birds in the United States and Canada than there were a mere 50 years ago. The causes of this biodiversity crisis are many, but almost all of them trace back to the ever-increasing industrial exploitation, habitat destruction on a global scale, vast volumes of pesticides, every one designed to kill, ever greater diversion of resources from natural ecosystems into the human project, and the list goes on. A full-scale effort to reduce these impacts is clearly required, but the single most important thing we can do is greatly increase the lands and waters set aside in perpetual protection from this assault. To quote the esteemed biologist E.O. Wilson, many decades of research have convinced me and many other conservation scientists that we must save at least half of the planet Earth from industrial exploitation if we hope to avoid catastrophic plant and animal extinctions. The bill now before us, H. 897, is a modest but important step in this direction. Logging, the greatest source of disturbance in New England forests today, has an overall negative impact on biodiversity. Continually removing wood from the forest robs the forest community of essential nutrients and critical habitat. By repeatedly creating new openings, logging fragments the forest, which increases the risk of local extinction. We must recognize that it is not the species that thrive on disturbance that most need our help. Disturbances everywhere. What are genuinely rare and most in need of protection are mature ecosystems where the wounds of disturbance have time to heal and the web of ecological interactions has time to develop to its fullest extent. Any land use policy is likely to help some species and harm others, and protecting our public forest for logging is no exception. Nonetheless, there will still be ample amounts of early successional habitat that logging now provides. Natural disturbance will continue, as will logging on private land. Moreover, there is suitable habitat for many non-forest species in various wildlife refuges, military installations, around airports and farm fields, along highways and railroads, and so on. Forestry science has developed a set of tools that will be of great value going forward as we take stock of just how much carbon and living diversity our forests contain. We object not to the science of forestry, but rather to the goals it serves. Traditional forestry is devoted to the singular purpose of maximizing the amount of wood products that can be harvested over time. This is a grossly inadequate basis for managing our public forests because it fails to include critical benefits of profound importance, including carbon storage and biodiversity protection, as well as enhanced recreational, educational, psychological, and even spiritual benefits that only the grandeur and majesty of mature forests can
You're
provide.
almost done, you're over the limit by over 30 seconds, I want to be fair to everybody else.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, appreciate you. Any questions?
Yeah, we'll yield to that. I yield my time to you,
It doesn't work that way.
I just want to conclude
Thank you,
then.
Representative Carlton-Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. You have some fantastic experts in here to speak to you. Excuse me, sir. I come in support of House 840 and Senate 435, which would allow the Department of Environmental Protection to have oversight of composting operations here in the Commonwealth. Traditionally, and I know our friends from the Farm Bureau here, has been regulated by our agricultural officials, but with changes, especially in the central and eastern part of the Commonwealth, we feel that as neighborhoods have grown, it's another indication of the congestion we've seen in this part of the state, that some of our municipalities, such as the town of Northborough, and to an extent the town of Berlin as well, both that I represent, need stronger tools to deal with these operations that neighborhoods have grown up around. And I realize some of my farming friends have strong feelings that their farms were there first, and the neighborhoods came second. But that being said, we've got to look realistically at what's going on in our society, especially in the central and eastern part of the Commonwealth right now. And these operations need some more oversight. And we'd like to have our local officials have that much more oversight as well, so they can take into account the current status of their towns. I would ask that you look favorably on both of these pieces of legislation and help my constituents protect quality of life, where we find very precious quality of life in my district, as I know you do in your beautiful districts out in your respective parts of the Commonwealth. I thank you for your time. I'll take no more because I see that you've got some great people testifying on some great legislation today. So that being said, I am happy to answer any questions of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking me out of turn, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair. Have a great afternoon.
All right, is it Susan Purser? And Michael? And the rest of the yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us today. Appreciate it. My name is Susan Purser. I live in Beckett, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, and I am supporting H 897, an act to relative to forest protection. Many proponents of this bill, including myself, support the forest and logging industry in the state. I want to talk about other financial implications of this bill today. This bill is not about logging on private land, and we would expect that this bill will barely, if at all, affect private forestry interests. Even when the paper industry collapsed around 1998 and the jobs declined by 55% and the wood industry manufacturing sector lost 26% of its jobs, forestry and logging remained steady with only about a 3% decline. I'll refer to document number 3 that you may, document 2 you may have in your package. The 80% of the forested land that is privately owned is open to be logged. H 897 will not affect private forestry practices, so people should not be worried about that. Often the bids for state logging jobs come from companies in New York State, according to the DCR, so the contracts may not be generating revenue for people in Massachusetts. You have a document that shows that at Wendell State Forest, it was not a big money-making operation. that is document number 4. Most of the logging jobs on state land do not involve a lot of money. Another important thing to think about is that in general we lose money on the logging jobs, state logging jobs. An example right now is in Wendell State Forest. 100-year-old trees are being sold and cut down for about $45 a piece. White oak is sold to the logging companies for about $15 and red oak for $43 a tree. And they're mostly red oaks. This makes no sense at all. These trees are much more valuable for ongoing carbon storage. Let me refer to document 1, which gives you the annual logging revenue versus costs in Massachusetts, and shows that generally in most of the districts, the logging operations function at a loss. You can see Northern Berkshire District, negative $144,000, Central Berkshire District, negative $200,445. So money is not being made to the state on logging.
Susan, here again, I want to be respectful to everybody who signed up. We're still on page 1. We have 7 pages to go. You're over your 3 minutes right now. I want to make sure. Feel free to submit the testimony. And documentation has been handed out here as well, but you are over the limit right now.
Oh, I already did my 3 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
my apologies.
Yeah, no.
Thank you, sir.
No. Michael?
I'm Michael Kellett. I represent the nonprofit group Restore the North Woods. We're based in Massachusetts. I live in Westford. We have members across the state. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. I'm here to speak in favor of page 897. I thought I'd just quickly go through the purpose of this bill all in one list because we're getting so much input on many different issues. The purpose is to fight climate change by designating 610,000 acres of state land as parks and reserves that will keep carbon stored in trees and soils. It's to protect native biodiversity by permanently preserving the lands for the full range of wildlife. It's to provide public benefits such as clean air and water, soil integrity, other things that forests provide. It stops harmful activities such as inappropriate land sales, pipelines, clear cuts for solar and wind facilities, other industrial infrastructure. It would take concrete action to fulfill Governor Baker's commitment to employ forest ecosystems to mitigate global warming. The bill would not cost taxpayers of Massachusetts additional budget funds. It would not reduce jobs in the private or public sector. It would not affect how private landowners, municipalities, or counties use their land. It would not restrict how private foresters or loggers do business. It would not limit the Massachusetts forest products industry. It would not change Department of Conservation and Recreation private forest management programs. Just to respond quickly to a couple of the issues raised by opponents of the bill, the issue of carbon, saying that there's no concern about logging on state lands ignores the fact that the forests are only storing about half the carbon that they did in 1620 because of all the clearing that was done. So they're still recovering, and yes, we have been cutting at a slightly lower rate than the forest is growing back, but if we weren't cutting on state lands at all, it would grow back even faster. We would absorb more carbon, which is a super high priority right now in terms of climate change. So any cutting that's going on in state lands is reducing the amount of carbon that's sequestered. The other thing is the issue of we need to log the forest for forest health, for wildlife and so forth, and there's no credible